Right, so good evening to everybody who's watching on YouTube. We're looking at Bible study number 133. This is Matthew chapter 1, verse 18. We might get to 19. It's a lot this time, but I don't think I did enough work today. All right, so I'll bring up Matthew chapter 1. And like we said, we're going to look at the birth of Jesus, which is starting at verse 18. We're going to continue the study of what should have been or what is a simple verse in appearance, but it did bring up a lot of issues. We're at the point here where Joseph and Mary are still betrothed, right? His mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph. And Joseph has to make a decision soon. Mary's life at this point, we may not realize it, but Mary's life is in danger. We don't see that in our modern minds because we've been numb to sin by our lovely culture, by the media. The last thing I had shown you guys was some Greek stuff that Maya had used throughout his commentary of this verse, and that made it very tough. But I remind you, we can use that Greek stuff, copy it, and paste it onto a Google search to get the meanings, and it carries you to the concordances where you get the original language, the meanings, and the context, the time, the number of times they've been used in the original text, etc. All right. I will not go through every single one of those because if you see the commentary page of how many times the original Greek is used, we'll never finish. So I'll use the other commentators to help us through. The only reason I brought all this up is so that we can understand that there is a lot of effort required to study the word, which is why if some preacher comes to you and they preach a message of health, wealth, and prosperity, you know they didn't do real research because the word of God tells us that we will be hated. We are in a world whose system is full of hate towards us. The world hated Jesus, whom we follow. So it must hate us. The world didn't change. It was evil way back before Noah's time, and it's evil now. Okay? These are not problems that we have when studying the word, though. They are tests of faith and commitment. So I encourage us to be committed to the Lord and translate these or read and study the commentaries, study the word itself, the original languages, as deeply and as much as you can. Now, in the Expositor's Greek Testament, they pointed out some guy named Shands called verses 18 to 25, further than this. They call it the justification of the genealogy of Jesus. So we may have to look forward to that. Cambridge Bible for Schools and Colleges teaches us that Mary is translated in different languages. Mary is Miriam in Hebrew, Maria in Greek. So if you're doing original language studies, you may see Joseph was betrothed to Miriam. Right? The tradition at that time, now we get into the historical, cultural context. The tradition at that time was that a betrothed pair would remain separate for a year, but they'll be considered man and wife. So we're going to do a small side quest into the marriage process of people at that time. In that time, marriages were transactional agreements or arrangements between and among families. Something called endogamy was practiced. This is the marriage. This is a practice where people get married to close relatives. So cousins getting married or younger girls getting married to uncles, it was a norm. It might seem very weird to us, but that was their norm. Parents would arrange the marriage. There's something that's strange. The parents would arrange the marriage. Often they do this without the male and female's consent. So imagine your parents arranging a marriage for you. That brings up enough stress, okay? That brings up a lot of stress. We'll get into some of it. Most girls, get ready for this one, most girls at that time were married at age 13. Contracts would have been made when they were 12. There was something called a ketubah in place. The ketubah was if the marriage was dissolved before the ceremony, the groom would have to pay a settlement. it is related to something that we call the bride price. All right, there's more on the ketubah after. Unfaithfulness during the betrothal period was punishable by death. So Mary here is in serious jeopardy. If some Pharisee came up and they were like, you're pregnant and you're not married yet to Joseph, or you've been kept apart from Joseph, how could you be pregnant? She can't say, well, the Holy Spirit and God's power made me pregnant. They'd be like, oh boy, wow. The whole Old Testament, because they had the Old Testament, they'd say the whole Tanakh don't have anything like that. So on top of being a whore, you want to bring God in this, and they would want to destroy her. And it was punishable by death. If she was executed, all her property would become Joseph's. So, there was motivation here to execute her. The parents of the groom paid a bride price. And the contract that they would draw up at that time would run for as much as a year. And it's considered binding. The couple would be considered married even though the ceremony and other marriage formalities would not yet taken place. The couple would have limited interaction with each other at that time. And the contract period would be somewhat of a test of fidelity. Y'all think about it now. How many males, females, like, I had to cheat because I didn't see my man, or I had to cheat because I didn't see my girl. For how long? A couple of days. Right? You really had to cheat. There was no other alternative. Life gets so tough. This was a good way to test faithfulness to the marriage. Now, y'all, I would have pointed this out way in the past. If a young man and woman get into a relationship and they want to get together, obviously, in a relationship, you'll want to be with each other sexually. If you choose not to, and the reason is to please and honor God, you win. You win. Because you can trust that. Welcome to Janessa. Sorry, welcome to Janessa. Welcome to Mithara as well. You win because if the reason you don't want to get together is something other than God, you'll fail. I guarantee you it will fail. All right? So knowing that another person who you love is not going to sleep with you because he or she is obedient to God, it gives you a peace of mind and a guarantee they're not going to sleep with anybody else because they fear God. Get it? It's not about you. It's about God. You see, because you will change. You will change over time. And if you change over time, and the other person was like, I can't cheat on you. You see how good looking you are? You might change. You might grow older and be less good looking. So that promise and that reason for not cheating on you, that would go out the window. Right? Let's do the right thing, but do it for the right reason all the time. It should always be about him and service. Okay? The couple and that during this test of fidelity time when they're not in close contact, they would have communication through a friend of the bridegroom. So I guess, friends would pass messages and so on between them because they wouldn't get to interact very much. The wedding itself would involve a procession from the bride's house to the groom's house, where the bride will be treated like royalty. It's a whole procession. They dress her up and take her across. That's kind of like what happens in Trinidad, because I think the Hindus do it where one person goes from one house to the next person. I'm just not sure which house they go to. But there is that, it's very similar to what we might have been accustomed to in Trinidad. The wedding would also involve a party and a feast for the whole village. So everybody wants to see weddings. Even if you don't like the people, you want to see a wedding because you get, free food, free music, and friends. A lovely time. I don't like those times though. That's just for me. The ketubah, I said we were getting back to that. The ketubah is a unilateral agreement drawn by witnesses. Unilateral meaning it's an agreement, but it's a one-way agreement. Unilateral, one-way. It's drawn up by witnesses where the Jewish husband guarantees to meet minimum human and financial conditions for the marriage. It's basically the husband saying, I will keep this woman in this kind of order. I will provide for her this level of living, minimum. She'll get better, not worse. It was not a contract for the purchase of a wife, though. You see why we have to state that. This was an agreement for the witnesses to identify willingness by both parties. So earlier when we said the parents would arrange it, there still had to be willingness and agreement from the parties when the ketubah is drawn up. Because the witnesses would be like, okay, yes, we were there, we saw it, she agreed to marry him, he agreed to marry who. He stated that he would give her this level of lifestyle or better, and she agreed to it. A very important document. And this document also, aside from the willingness, it provided protection for the woman. Sometimes, like nowadays, people be like, oh, the woman have no rights, the man getting everything. She have to marry some old man and her parents arrange it. Oh, why the woman have no freedom? Calm down, tanties. She had to agree. And the ketubah provided that if there was a divorce or death, she'll be taken care of. Nice. That's more than they get now, because you think of how many girls they shack up or get married to some guy and just get dumped on their rear ends, left like a mess. This happens more often than you all would know. There is a link that I provide in the document for further reading on this. All right. Now I want you to think about this. Imagine how many greedy fathers would have used this system to take advantage of selling off their poor daughters. People could have gotten taken advantage of in this. A decent cultural arrangement, because it offered options and freedom to choose. It was arranged for the protection of the children. It could have been used for the advancement of selfish people at terrible cost to innocence. Now, in theory, it's a good system, but people could corrupt it. And I know many of you might think you don't want your parents to pick your spouse, but check this one. Given the divorce rates today, I'm pretty sure that picking your own, it's not working. It sounds funny, but people are getting into relationships without godly advice. That's the biggest problem. If you want to get into a relationship and you see some boy, some girl, and you fall in love, I guarantee you, friends, unless you make that decision guided by the word, you're making a terrible decision. Okay? And sometimes to be guided by the word, we need other people's input. Yeah, we will, because we could be blinded by love. So y'all, one day if I meet somebody, y'all need to look out for me, because I could be blinded. I know you all will think, no, that's not possible. It totally is. Okay? Man, art a stupid creature. I'm talking about the male species here, as man art a stupid creature. We are, for real. All right? People today seek a man or woman based on their tastes and preferences at a time in life when they don't even know themselves. Now, I know this girl is getting booked into a marriage at 13. That was the most common age. But that's an age. I'm not saying for anybody to get married at 13. Please don't. But I'm just saying that system might have worked because at that age, she would have grown up into and dealt with a lot of issues and problems into becoming a woman with a man who cared about her. And he would have done the same. So it might have led to more, a greater marriage success rate. All right. The truth is, though, we must always measure people by the standard of the word, because the word doesn't change. Our emotions, our thoughts, our eyes, our ears, our opinions change. Okay. I won't go into more of the relationship thing again. We can do that on a Friday. But remember this, parents see things that we don't see. And godly parents will make fairly good choices. Mind you, I don't see very many godly parents around, and there are quite a few who are still very immature in the word, so they may not make good choices. But that's why faith in a perfect God covers us. You see, if we follow God's instructions and God's way, no matter how good or bad a situation might seem, God uses it to bless us. That includes developing us. He makes things happen as He wants, regardless of what we intend, regardless of what other people intend. So don't worry if people target you for destruction or they try to abuse you out of hate. God is in control. His will be done. As long as we're doing what He wants us to do, things will be right. All things work together for good for those who love the Lord, who are called according to His purpose, though. Remember that part. Go back to our focus. Now, those things that I listed would have been in place for Mary and Joseph, even if it was in a smaller capacity because Mary got pregnant. The Bible doesn't tell us all those things, but the culture at the time of the writers, their readers would have understood and known. That's why when Matthew wrote this, he wrote it expecting people to know all this stuff. That's why when we study it, we don't know it, we have to learn it. It's important, right? That's how we read the word properly. That betrothal period was when Mary would have been visited by Gabriel. That's in Luke 1. She questioned Gabriel, and with her innocent self, she said, how could she be pregnant? Because she knew there was still time on the contract before she could be with her husband. There's no way I could be pregnant because I wouldn't meet my husband like that until some time. And of course, she knew she wasn't a tramp and she wasn't traipsing around running every man down. So there was no chance of a pregnancy happening anytime soon. Mary's visit by the angel was related to us, like I said, in Luke 1. And it is important that we compare and we use different parts of the word to put together the whole story. We're not picking and choosing. There's a difference. Don't pick and choose. But you take what's parallel, what speaks about the same thing, put them together. That's what I did here. I'm not going into Luke, though, we're studying Matthew. All right. Mary's visit there. Oh, sorry, no. This word here in she was betrothed. This means considered married. And some people nowadays, when we say considered married, it's because the two people shacked up. Once again, 40 days believes the Bible, and being shacked up is not right. Okay? If you are shacked up, go get married. If you are in a relationship and you're considering it, go get married before. If you're in a relationship and it's sexual, stop. I'd tell you stop the whole relationship. I would. Because obviously he and you, or she and you, are not children of God. Because you don't call Jesus Lord if that's the case. If He is Lord of your life, you consider what He wants before whatever you want. The term considered married or betrothed means that they were faithful to the fiancé as if they were married. And the very judgmental society that they lived in would have recognized that couple as husband and wife. Now, it's evident when they traveled, because in Luke 2, verse 5, it refers to Mary as Joseph's betrothed when they were headed to Bethlehem. But they were moving as man and wife to Bethlehem, right? The pulpit commentary used the word hypostasis to describe the Holy Trinity. Hypostasis means the substance or essential nature of an individual. Okay? Something that is essential to an individual. It was applied here to mean that God is three in one. Three in one in that the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, they are not separate parts that are incomplete to make a complete God. You know, without one, you have an incomplete God. No, they're all complete in and of themselves. And they represent different roles that God plays in his plan. But they are one and they are God. Ellicott mentions the apocryphal gospels. Now, in the commentaries, Ellicott spoke about the apocryphal gospels because they had information. The apocrypha is not part of the Bible. The apocryphal gospels offered information that Matthew doesn't give us, and Luke doesn't give us. And the apocrypha was used by artists. The artists would read the apocryphas or the apocryphal books for descriptions of biblical scenes, descriptions of angels, and draw them, paint them. Shows that a lot of the art, even though they try to paint, you know, but biblical stuff, would be misleading. Apocrypha, the word itself means obscure. It means obscure or hidden. And it refers to books that some people consider to be part of the Bible, but they're not. Some people consider them to be extensions of the Bible, but they're not. They are not missing parts. They have no relevance to us as we study the word. So please avoid going to the Apocrypha. It might seem like I don't know, it might make you feel special. I'm studying the birth of Jesus, so I'll go to the apocryphal Gospel of Thomas, and I'll read that Gospel of Thomas, and it'll give me some details. I don't know if the Gospel of Thomas has, right? I didn't read it. But some people be like, yes, I had to go to these books to get information that I really need to understand this in the Bible. The only information you might get from the apocryphal books that you could take is historical context. Don't take it for facts, biblical facts. Take it for historical context. But you might as well take any historical book like that. So they are not, the apocryphal books are not better than, say, Roman records or Assyrian records or Babylonian records. Same thing. They're not the Bible, but we can use them for historical fact contexts, knowing, however, though their writers may have been biased. Right? Benson gave me a sensible perspective. Joseph Benson said that Mary would have kept the secret of her immaculate conception from Joseph because Joseph would have doubted her. And as far as she knew, he would want to have killed her for being such a shameful liar. Sorry. Think about it. If some girl pretending to be a virgin told a guy who she's going to get married to that she's miraculously pregnant, oh, it was God that made me pregnant. You all think of it. If you have a male friend and he has some girl he's head over heel dopey for, and she tells him she got pregnant and God made her pregnant. When you hear that, the first thing you'll tell him is, you'll hit him a slap probably. He's like, why are you still with her? Right? So she would have kept that quiet. Think of what would Joseph say? What would he think? Fortunately, though, that's a call coming. I declined it. Fortunately for everybody involved here, God does everything completely. And we will see later how Joseph was made knowledgeable. That's coming in the verses down here when angel appeared to him, verse 20, right? Benson also pointed out that in such a way, the young woman could be convinced. My phone ring. Shut up. Yeah. In such a situation, the young woman could be convinced that she did something wrong and fall victim to her conscience. Hold on. What do I mean by that is, if a young lady is in a bad situation, she gets surrounded by people and they will be convincing her and telling her different things so that the truth gets distorted in her own mind. This happens a lot with witnesses in police custody. The police badger you so much, ask you so many questions, and you don't even know the right from the wrong anymore because you've heard and answered so many questions. They lead you. They're very skilled at this. Lawyers do it to people, right? Imagine how many people get convinced that things happened even when they didn't happen, or they get convinced that things didn't happen when they did because of skillful and wicked men. Many criminals would have been sent to prison, and many criminals are still sent to prison by corrupt policemen and lawyers who are more concerned about their reputations rather than seeking justice. There's not a knock on the cops. I could knock the lawyers though. There's not a knock on the cops because many cops are honest, but quite a few of them are more concerned with if this person who I arrested is wrong, I have to go now find the right one. So I'll make sure this person looks wrong. So I'll just close the case and move on with my life and nobody will be on my back. Most people are more concerned in those situations about closing cases rather than moving ahead. This verse here, when she was found to be with child from the Holy Spirit, that part confirms Isaiah 7:14, which says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." And then after the Bible, when Jesus was preaching, he said, "A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign," because he knows just how much people chase after signs. Speaking of it, we have to talk about those, the eclipse on April 8th. Just bear in mind, if you don't hear the full. Okay, I got bounced out. I hope that you all heard the last thing I was saying, where I was saying that we have to talk about the eclipse coming on April 8th. It has no relevance to biblical prophecy. Number one, let me just say that clearly there's no relevance to biblical prophecy, despite what all the other clowns are saying on, well, not all the other clowns. The clowns are saying out there, right? That's a big deal. In 2024, there's going to be an eclipse, and lots of people are talking about how it will pass over. It'll be seen in many towns in America called Nineveh. America is not that important, okay? Yeah. I just want to touch on verse 19. "And her husband Joseph, being a just man and unwilling to put her to shame, resolved to divorce her quietly." See that? I have a very short piece to do on 19. It's done. Here we see that Joseph was an upright man, and he was not legalistic like Pharisees, because Joseph would have wanted to kill her. "Oh, you cheated on me before we even get together. Kill her." That's how a normal man would be, or a pharisaical man. The character of Joseph was one of a man that's honorable, God-fearing, and forgiving. It is good to follow the law, but the Pharisees used to use the law like modern lawyers do. They seek to take the law and twist it so that they make a gain. Imagine the hurt ego of a man. Welcome, Mr. Dave. Sorry. Imagine the hurt ego of a man if he saw his young bride to be carrying somebody else's child. Nowadays, people make jokes about, "Wow, that woman looking so pretty. I wonder if her son looking for a stepfather." People make those jokes. Or they see the kid and then they see his mother's like, "Sonny, you're looking for a stepdad," right? But it's a joke. A lot of people out there will make fun of such a man and say, "Oh, look at him. He is minding somebody else's child." There's a lot of pride in men that get hit if they are raising somebody else's kids, especially in a situation like this. Here I am, Joseph. I'm going to marry this girl. She's pregnant. She didn't even, but wow, this would look really bad on him, right? It would look awful on him. That kind of man would be overcome by grief and anger and seek to have her destroyed. Now, ladies out there, please be careful of egotistical men. Be careful choosing spouses. I'm always saying, if you look to choose a spouse, ladies and men, it should be a man of God. Deuteronomy 22, if you're looking, has some rules for sleeping with young women, and punishments are generally stoning the people who are wrong, stoning to death. Except in one case where if a man and woman sleep together before they get married and they agree to be married, the man has to pay the father of the bride a bride price for dishonoring her, but they can get married and he must never divorce her. Imagine how much of that, how many marriages would be saved if we had that rule. Joseph sought to dismiss Mary quietly. He did that to protect her from the death. And in doing so, he would have ended up taking a lot of frustration because of questions. Imagine all the nosy people. Hey, Joseph, I thought you were going to get married. What happened to the girl? Or they see him. Hey, Joseph, you know who I saw? I saw Mary and she was walking with a little child. He didn't look like you. It's a good thing you divorced that. Think of how people and gossips would have been. And poor Joseph would have to carry this for the rest of his life. He had the two options where he could have brought this before the courts or quietly just put her aside, divorce her, and let her go. Being a just man, he had to do one of those because he could not have married her because she blatantly breached his faith and his trust. All right. So before he knew this was God's promised son, Joseph could have divorced her and said, you know what? I don't know who you're sleeping with, but it's not me. So just go in peace. Just go in peace. Fine. That was his plan. He could not have married her. So he had the choice, let her go peacefully or take her to court and say, this little hoe, when I got pregnant, we didn't sleep together. She's supposed to be married to me. She needs to get stoned. And he would have won. And he would have taken everything that she had. So there was great profit in it for him. But he resolved being a just, honest, and upright man. It shows a lot about Joseph's character. Think of it, right? His behavior contrasts with our modern perceptions of faith and trust. You think, should your spouse be sleeping with somebody else? No. Jesus said if we even look lustfully at somebody, we are guilty of adultery. So even if they were not yet married, and if we are not yet married, we should not be looking lustfully on anyone. Our culture has bachelor parties and bachelor parties for modern idiots done in the manner that we see on TV where there are strippers involved and stuff. Guys, modern culture is a mess. You should not ever participate in the way they do things. And it's like that because Satan wants to make unfaithful behavior desirable. He hypes it up. You're supposed to do this. And it's easy for that to happen when our minds are corrupt and we are seeking to do wickedness. I'm almost done. This action by Joseph required a bill of divorcement because it was a serious relationship that they were in. And it wasn't like now where we change fiancés like clothes. This week she's engaged, next week she engaged to somebody else. This week he proposed to her and they have pictures and the beach picture of him on his knees and all this garbage. People do these things to get more pictures than anything, apparently. I don't know. Barnes tells us that adultery was a serious thing, and she would have been accused of adultery. In the Jewish world, stoning. In Egypt, they would have cut the nose off the adulteress. Ouch. In Persia, the nose and the ears would have been cut off. Adultery was a serious thing. Let me close the YouTube, okay? So I would like to say thank you very much to all the people who've been watching us on YouTube. We just did the rest of 18 and verse 19 of Matthew chapter 1 tonight. Join us again next time for the start of verse 20, and hopefully I'll be able to get through more. I don't know. So God's blessings to all on YouTube. Take care and good night. If I can stop the recording, I don't know how.